Hi everyone, how's it going? Welcome to the channel, and I'm here for a ranking video for you guys. Now, some of you might be very confused right now. You guys might be asking, why the crap are you talking about a band like Coldplay? You know, why is a metalhead talking about Coldplay? Well, if you know me well enough, you guys know that I do have a little bit of a history with Coldplay. I guess you could say that they were one of my phase bands, if you know what I mean. So, because of that, I am pretty familiar with this band and familiar with their stuff, of course. So I thought it would be interesting to rank the Coldplay discography from worst to best. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So at the bottom, for the worst Coldplay album, in my opinion, I gotta go with A Head Full of Dreams. Now, I remember when this album came out and when it was even announced and all that. I know that that this album was coming out at the time. Obviously, I didn't really have much interest in this album when it was coming out, since, I was kind of already starting to get out of my Coldplay phase at this point when this album was coming out. And, I tried to give it a listen even when it did come out, because I was thinking, okay, well, I'm sure there's at least one or two songs that I'll like from this album, right? Well, I was wrong. There's not a single track that I like off this album. And I think I know there's one song off this album. I believe it's called Adventure of a Lifetime, that I remember being very overplayed. I remember working when I had my job at Goodwill a few years back. I remember they played the crap out of this song in the store. I mean, yeah, I think it is an overplayed song. And with this album in particular, you can tell that Coldplay was really trying to go for a more mainstream, trying to be more trendy, I guess, try to get on top 40 radio, but it's overall not a very good album. I think it's easily their weakest. So A Head Full of Dreams, it's got to be at the bottom for me. I think it's easily their worst album. So next up, we got Mylo Xyloto. Now, with this album, I remember I did become a fan around the time this album came out. I believe this was actually the newest album at the time whenever I got into Coldplay, so yeah. And I remember even at the time, I thought that this was not one of their best albums. That's definitely not the case. This album, of course, features one of their most overplayed songs, that being Paradise. And, even when I was a big, massive Coldplay fan, obviously there was some stuff that I liked from this album. Obviously, because I was a biased fanboy, back in the day, back in late high school. But over time, like nowadays, my opinion of this album nowadays, I don't think it's that great of an album at all. So yeah, Mylo Xyloto, this is definitely an album where they experimented more. It's definitely different than the stuff that came before, which is why when I became a fan, I put this album at the bottom of my ranking. Like, I thought that this was the weakest at the time, of course, because again, this was like the most recent album at the time whenever I did get into them. This was like their 5th album. And yeah, definitely not a very good album. I'd say stay away from this one. So next up, we got Coldplay's latest album, Everyday Life. Now, this album, it's definitely another one of their worst. I mean, it's obviously within the top 3 worst. Yeah, definitely not a fan of this album. Now, obviously with this album, in comparison to the last album, A Head Full of Dreams, this is a step in the right direction, but it's not totally all there. I would say that this album is actually Coldplay's most boring album. This album, Everyday Life. And calling it boring is actually kind of a compliment compared to the albums that I've mentioned previously, because even though that is the case, I can't stand here and say that these songs are necessarily crap, besides a few exceptions. Some of these songs do have this sort of, church worshipy type sound within some songs, or maybe one song, I don't remember. I've only listened to this thing once, shortly after its release, of course. And what's ironic about that is there is a song on this album called Church, which I actually think is actually one of the better songs off of this album. Probably that song and the title track are actually decent. Now, I haven't returned to them probably since I first heard them, but they're decent songs, at least. But still, not anything special, don't have the best replay value. This album, you're not missing much. That's all I gotta say. I don't care for this album. So Everyday Life, not a very good album. So the next album up, we got Ghost Stories. Now, this album I do think is the best of their 2010s material, and the reason that I do have some respect for Ghost Stories is because I feel like that this album kind of does combine pretty much everything from Coldplay's career, I think, at least up to this point in their discography. You know, if you're into Coldplay's older material, you're gonna like songs like Oceans, that basically go back to the days of Parachutes, kind of. And this album does actually feature one of my favorite Coldplay songs, and that song being Midnight. Man, if you're into ambient, dark, atmospheric type music, this song is up your alley. You gotta check out this song. I mean, it's actually a really solid track, and I remember even since first listen, I enjoyed it. And I think to this day, I think it's a really good song. Now, it's really the highlight for me. Now, there is kind of some overplayed stuff on this album, like Magic and A Sky Full of Stars, especially A Sky Full of Stars. I mean, holy crap, that song. I remember in 2014, that song was rather overplayed. Now, I can't say that it's a terrible song, but it is kind of overplayed. So Ghost Stories, I think it's an okay album. I mean, there's some highlights. I mean, still, it's not one of their best. But now we get into the really good stuff that Coldplay came out with. Of course, the 2000s era. So next up in my ranking, we got Parachutes, which is their debut album. Now, I know some people say that this album is rather boring, and it kind of is with some songs. I think there is some highlights here. Of course, it's got Yellow, one of their biggest songs. Trouble, I think, is an okay song. I always thought the song Sparks was slightly underrated, actually. I don't mind this song. Spies, I also always thought was underrated. But yeah, Parachutes, it's a pretty good album. It's not one of their best or anything. It's not in my top 3, of course. But I do think it's a pretty decent album for what it is. So now we're in the top 3. So next up at number 3, we got A Rush of Blood to the Head, which is their second album, and yeah, not a bad album. I mean, I know a lot of people would actually place this album at number 1, and for understandable reasons. I mean, I can definitely see why. I think there is some pretty good stuff on this album. I know it's got In My Place, and I know it's got Clocks, which I know some people might say Clocks is overplayed, but I think that song is more deserving of being overplayed than some of their more recent material. Clocks is a good song, though. I do like it for what it is. And The Scientists, I think, is kind of overrated. I never really got the hype with that song, to be honest. I always thought that song was rather boring, I guess, like a lot of Coldplay's material, but it's not a terrible song. But yeah, A Rush of Blood to the Head, I think it's a pretty good album. It's not number 1, but I think it's good for what it is. So at number 2, now I'll be honest with you guys, number 2 and number 1 do go back and forth for me. I have my days where I like number 2 more than number 1, and I have my days where I like number 1 more than number 2, but yeah, you guys know that these albums can be kind of interchangeable, and there's really no wrong answer with these top 2. But at number 2, I'm going to have to go with X and Y. Man, X and Y is a great album. I'm not sure what it is, but this is still to this day an album that I will sit down and listen to if I'm in the mood for it. Like, if I'm going to listen to Coldplay, most of the songs that I'm going to be listening to will probably be from this album. X and Y, I mean, if you're looking to check out the indie rock genre, this is a great start. I mean, definitely check out X and Y. I mean, this album definitely has a lot of highlights. What If, Fix You, of course. I know Fix You is more of an emotional song. And it's also got some underrated songs too, like Low and A Message. But yeah, there's a lot of great stuff on X and Y. I mean, even if you're not a big fan of Coldplay, I'd still recommend give this album a chance. I'll still listen to it maybe for nostalgic value, for sure. Definitely one of their best. So at number 1, now I guess this leaves one album left, of course. But at number 1, I think you guys know what it is at this point. Number 1 is Viva la Vida, or Death and All of His Friends. Also could be known as Prospects March, which is basically an EP that kind of accompanied Viva la Vida, which I'll talk about that as well, that EP. But holy crap. I mean, this album might be my favorite indie rock album of all time. I don't know. I mean, again, like with X and Y, even if you're not a fan of Coldplay, give this album a chance. You never know, it might surprise you. I mean, the thing is with Viva la Vida is, sure, it is more experimental for them. Like, they started experimenting more with orchestral stuff, like more strings and violins, and, you know, it's more of a cinematic kind of album, which is kind of cool. And I think that's really the thing that I really gravitate to with this album, you know? Like, it's got a lot of great songs on it. I mean, you got songs like Lost. What else? There's a song called Yes that I think is really good. Lovers in Japan. What else? Oh, the title track, Viva la Vida. Of course, that's a classic. I mean, you can't go wrong with that song. Violet Hill's also really good. Strawberry Swing. I mean, it's a pretty good album. I mean, I really dig this album. Now, if I had to pick a least favorite song off this album, I'd maybe go with the title track, Death and All of His Friends, or the second title track, you know, because this album basically has 2 titles, Viva la Vida and Death and All of His Friends. But Death and All of His Friends is probably my least favorite song on the album, if I had to pick a least favorite. But, yeah. Now, the EP that came with this, Prospects March, I might even say is just as good as the album Viva la Vida. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's got a lot of great songs like Glass of Water and Rainy Day. Rainy Day actually might be one of my other favorite Coldplay tracks. I don't know. I even like the title track, Prospects March, which is really good. I don't know. There's just not much to complain about with this album, Viva la Vida. I mean, I think it's easily their best. Again, either this album or X and Y. I have my days where I like X and Y more, but for now, I gotta put Viva la Vida at the top. So there you have it, guys. That is my ranking for the Coldplay albums. Let me know what you guys think. How would you rank the Coldplay albums? Feel free to let me know in the comments. So on that note, thanks for watching. Have a nice day and take care.